Imagine a machine so advanced that it powers itself, it repairs itself, and it even thinks about its own existence. Now imagine that somebody told you that it built itself. There's no blueprint, no engineer, just random chance and enough time. But today's guest says the real evidence tells a completely different story. Dr. Brian Miller is a physicist from Duke University with a PhD in physics as well as bachelor's from MIT, where he explores how engineering principles reveal intelligent design in the natural world. And today he joins us to unpack how the fine-tuning of the universe, from the origin of life to the human brain, points not to chaos, but to purpose. This is a Science Dilemma, and I'm Alan. I'm your host. Let's get into it. Thank you so much, Dr. Miller, for taking the time to join us.
It's a pleasure to be here.
With your, you have an impressive background, and it spans multiple scientific disciplines, including physics. So how has that diverse expertise shaped your unique approach to scientific inquiry?
And I've been really appreciative of the opportunities I've had because I received a bachelor's in physics with electrical engineering or engineering at MIT. It was a minor, and then I received a PhD in physics from Duke University. And what was really nice about the physics is I really learned how to address problems at a very foundational level, because in physics you learn how to look at underlying assumptions, basic principles. And then how do ideas develop from those principles? And that was really helpful. And what happens also is I learned how to identify patterns and break data into categories. So when those tools helped me to step into multiple disciplines because I helped to oversee the research with all of the intelligent design movement under the Discovery Institute. I've had to learn a little bit of the science in multiple fields. And my physics training has helped me to quickly understand what's taking place. Also, as I've looked at fields like origin of life or a lot of evolutionary claims, I found that they typically fall into very clear patterns. And what you find is most of the claims are based on assumptions which are highly questionable. So again, my training in science has helped me to identify those issues.
Not only are you a scientist and a physicist, but you are also a Christian, and you're pretty public about that, and very comfortable with that, in fact. So how do you integrate your faith and your scientific work? And because I think so many families that are Christians don't know how to, reconcile the two.
That's a really good question because for me, what happened is I went through an enormous period of doubting my faith. When I went to MIT, I took a class taught by a skeptic about the Bible, and I read Richard Dawkins, who talks a lot about how evolution disproves a creator. And I became pretty convinced that you either had people of science who were very rational and logical, or people of faith that just kind of accepted what they were told without questioning it. And I was a person of science, so I couldn't live like that. And I said, God, I don't know if you exist, but if you do exist, you have to prove it to me. I don't know if that's fair, but that's just the way it has to be. And what happened is God really honored that prayer. And over the years, I was able to contact leaders in science and faith, people that were experts in the evidence for the resurrection. And what happened is over that time, I realized that the evidence for our faith is really extraordinary. And part of that is realizing that the evidence for design in nature, in every field of nature, is just overwhelming. So that's really what brought me back to faith.
Would you say that intelligent design is kind of like the foundational reality that you have to believe in order to then also build upon it into your religious relationship with God?
Oh yeah, and that realization has been recognized since the ancient Greeks. Like, this is not a recent debate. If you go back to people like Socrates and Aristotle and Plato, they debated people like Democritus and other philosophers over the same issues we debate today. So many of the ancient Greeks believed that everything could be explained in terms of basic atoms and the interactions, and they felt that everything was just a product of chance and time, versus the other philosophers that believed we're the product of a mind. So this is an ancient debate, and what happens is that is a foundational question upon which everything else is built. Because if we're an accident, then the Christian faith is obviously false, and we'll just die and cease to exist. But if we are created, then that has huge implications, because you first have to ask, who is your creator? And then once you answer that question, you know the purpose of life.
I'm going to do this in 10 seconds. If you want more bonus resources for this and every episode and early access to all future Science Dilemma series, go to our website for more information. That's it. Wait, 1 second. Yeah. And so from all of your studies, what are the main things in nature that make people think that there might be a design or a designer behind it all?
Yeah, and there's several lines of evidence. One is if you look at general relativity in the study of our universe, you see that the universe had to have a beginning. Because our universe is expanding, if you go back in time, everything had to begin time, space, matter, and energy. And that points to the fact that there had to be a creator. That's significant. And there's also the issue of the laws of nature. Because if you were to design a universe and you used random laws, you'd almost never have a universe that could support life. But both the structure of the laws and the precision in which they were made point to the fact that there was a creator behind those laws. Because if they were slightly different, there wouldn't be life. Also, if you look at Earth, Earth appears highly optimized, very carefully designed, both for the purpose of supporting life and even in an amazing way. Like we've got organisms that live at the equator and at the poles. That's not easy. And also, it's designed for scientific investigation and technological development. Also, if you look at the origin of life, what's clear is life could not have originated through an undirected process. It had to be designed, and the positive evidence of design is overwhelming. And finally, if you look at life in general, you see evidence of design everywhere, from the simplest cell to the most complex organ, which would be the human brain.
Could you speak to what you just said about like the life existing at the equator and life existing at the at the poles as well, and that not being easy? What did you mean by that?
Well, what happens if you imagine that our Earth directly faces the sun? What would happen is the equator would be incredibly hot and the poles would be incredibly cold. So maybe life could exist at about 30 degrees north of the equator and 30 degrees south in a very narrow band. But because our planet has a perfect tilt, we have seasons, and that helps to regulate the temperature, which allows animals to live everywhere from the equator, which is not too hot for many animals, to the poles, which are not too cold for some animals. So that's what I mean by the fact that there's such a diversity of life that lives all across our planet. And that would not happen if we don't have the perfect tilt. And also, if the rotation rate was either too fast or too slow. Also, what happens with our moon is our moon helps to stabilize that tilt. So, without a moon of the right size and the right distance, we would have such erratic weather patterns that you couldn't have complex civilization.
And you mentioned something about like the simplest living cells, and I think a Darwinian evolutionist would say the first cells,
Mhm.
right? Which I don't know if that's a term that you would even use yet or not, but how does that show signs of design?
Right. So, what people talk about is the origin of life. And what they mean by that is the first cell that could self replicate and sustain itself. So, that's the origin of life. And what happens is you might also hear the term called Luca, which is the last universal common ancestor. And that would be a living cell that was the ancestor of all of life we see today. But the origin of life, they believe, happened earlier than that. And as it turns out, if you look at the laws of nature, things like thermodynamics, what becomes clear is that a cell could never have formed by chance because all natural laws will either move a system to greater disorder, greater entropy. And for those of you that have children, you know that's a natural tendency, or it'll move a system from high energy to low energy. A ball will roll downhill, it won't roll uphill. But life requires chemicals that are highly ordered, molecules that are in very specific arrangements, and also lots of very high energy arrangements. So the bonds in life have a lot of energy. So it is a physical impossibility for simple chemistry to turn into a cell. Also, if you look at a simple cell, even the simplest possible cell, you see incredible levels of design. One of the projects I'm working on is looking at engineers who are studying the simplest possible self replicating machine and comparing that to researchers looking at minimally complex cells. And you see an overlap of systems that have to be there. You have to have energy production, you've gotta have information processing, selective gateways, you've gotta have repair, recycling, control systems, and the list goes on. So what you see is positive evidence of design, which is overwhelming, and clear evidence that even a cell much, much simpler than that could not have originated by chance.
So are you almost saying, or maybe you're definitely saying this, is that like the highest levels of human engineering are still catching up to the simplest levels of biological or chemical
Mhm.
cells?
If you look at the simplest cell possible, what happens is that technology is vastly superior to what we can do. In fact, there was a mathematician named Robert Rosen, and he has a book called Life Itself. And he thought very deeply about what does it take to have self-replication where something can directly copy itself. And it is enormously difficult. It requires principles that we don't even begin to understand. So the technology in life is vastly superior to our own. The most extreme example is the human brain, because our brain operates with an efficiency far greater than human designed computers. Because if our brain had the same energy efficiency as our computers, it would burn up in an instant. So again, our bodies, even the simplest cell, shows a technology produced by a mind far superior to our own.
So, can you explain what that means as far as like why thinking that way might help us understand life better than just thinking about evolution?
Sure, because evolution assumes everything is simple because it happened by chance. It assumes there's no overarching design logic. It assumes that it's just sort of things randomly thrown together in haphazard and crude ways. But life is just the opposite. Engineers don't just throw things together, they plan things in advance. So if you have a car, every part of the car is designed to fit with every other part of the car with perfect precision. And that's what we see in life is perfect precision. And what you see in life is a lot of the same design patterns. Things like four-bar linkages, things like triple hinge limbs, control feedback loops. And even if you look at how systems engineers design products, you see the same concerns applied in life. Life also has risk management systems. It also has information processing. It also has a control of gateways between interfaces. So the more you look at life, the more you see the same principles that's employed by human engineers, but at a much better level.
I know that now we're talking biology, we're talking about cells, but because of your expertise in so many different disciplines, how have you seen when it comes to intelligent design, all of them playing out and how they integrate with each other? I guess is my question.
We actually have a conference coming up where we're bringing engineers and biologists together. And what we're seeing is that design principles that engineers use are helping to unlock the mysteries of life. So that's in a very practical way how we're putting this into practice. But also, what you're finding is the different principles of design in different disciplines work together harmoniously. So, if you want to have technology, you're going to have creatures with high resolution vision. Well, that means you have to have a sun that produces light of the right frequency. That means your atmosphere has to let in light, but it has to block all the radiation that's harmful, which is what our atmosphere does. In fact, even water allows the right radiation through and blocks harmful radiation, which is amazing. Also, what happens is the wavelength of light is perfect for the optics of the eye, particularly the human eye. Because if the wavelength were longer, then what would happen is the focal point would be a much fuzzier image. So you couldn't see in great detail. Your eyes would have to be the size of football fields, or you wouldn't have high resolution image. And if the wavelength were shorter, there'd be other problems. So we have the perfect the light has the perfect wavelength to produce a high resolution image, which allows us to do technology. Also, everything about the human body, from our upright posture to our dexterous hands to our ability to communicate with complex facial gestures, allows there to be complex civilizations that can produce advanced technology based on science. So, what we're finding is all these different principles of design from chemistry, from physics, from the human body to our planet all fit together for a greater purpose.
And as a physicist, is this possible? Or I guess it's always possible, but Are we even close to seeing this reality exist anywhere else?
No, in fact, what you're finding is that the universe has to be designed with enormous precision for you to have life, and particularly complex life. You have to have a planet which has countless details which are perfectly designed to have complex civilizations. You see technology in life which vastly surpasses human technology. So, in every way, what we see is something that's so improbable that it would never happen by chance, and also something that points to a mind far greater than our own and a creator that's loving and caring.
So we're not even close to seeing simple life on another planet at all.
Oh, well, if you look at other planets, like what they're called exoplanets, they're not even close to having the characteristics necessary for complex life. Either they're too hot, too cold, they don't have a magnetic field to protect them from radiation, they don't have a stable orbit with the right tilt. So there's just countless details that we have that are not even similar to what's in other planets.
I can only imagine how many people, because I'm stunned at what you said about even just vision.
Yeah,
I like
yeah,
the wavelengths
yeah.
and that needing to be a very specific length.
What happens is over the centuries, people have noticed different aspects of design in different fields. Even people like Galileo or Isaac Newton or Leonardo da Vinci, they kind of looked at this design and noted that it was similar to human design in many ways and superior to it in others. People have noticed what's amazing about the laws of physics for several decades. Like a famous book was by Tipler, another author about the anthropic principle. Another person that's done amazing research is Michael Denton. So he just recently, in the last few years, wrote a book about the children of light, which talks about the incredible details of light that are designed for life. He's done books about water, which is also amazing. Water has countless properties that are essential for the level of life we have on the planet, which are highly improbable. He has a book about secrets in the cell. There's many other authors who've talked about this. Stuart Burgess has done amazing research. He's an engineer in UK about how the human limbs are optimized for efficiency and for effectiveness. You have people like Steve Loftman and Howard Glicksman that wrote the book Your Design Body. So this knowledge is the result of decades of research. And what's happened now is an accelerated rate. We're seeing the genius of design because both our technology is advancing and our understanding of life is increasing, and more people are looking at life from this engineering perspective. So it's just going to get better and better and better as time goes on.
It's not just that life has the capacity or ability to exist, but that it was also designed to be basically, that we'd be in awe, right? And study it. And we have the
Yeah,
ability to.
exactly, exactly. So to even appreciate this, you've got to have creatures with advanced brains, the ability to speak, have language. They have to have the limbs that can create technology. So there's so many aspects about our planet and our body that clearly show that we were designed to understand the incredible design in nature and also to communicate it. And even aspects of our brain are designed for worship. So, are even designed to worship our creator.
One of the rebuttals I've heard to that is that the universe wants us to be able to study itself. Like, like basically they're putting a spin on what Christians are saying, but saying that it's just a naturalistic way of looking at it, that's why we've developed all of this. Do you ever engage?
Yeah, and part of the argument would be that we just kind of evolved and this is what helps us to survive. But that doesn't work when you look at the details. Because if you look at what is evolution capable of doing, every shred of evidence we have is that evolution can allow you to adapt better to an environment, but its ability to change is limited. In fact, even if you look at small scale evolution, what's happened is people have realized it looks more like engineering, that it's not just random mutations and selection, but organisms are designed to monitor the environment and then they alter their bodies to meet their needs as the environment changes. And even mutations aren't entirely random, that you have what's called natural genetic engineering, where you have systems in cells that will target certain changes more than others. So what we see is even our ability to adapt to our environment appears designed, but it's only designed to adapt within limits. That the dramatic changes you see in the fossil record in a geological instant require far more information than what would be possible in the time frame by just the mathematics. So what you're seeing as a designer designed everything for a purpose, that it's not just that we evolved by chance.
And before I let you go, I just have one last question, and this is more of a Christian faith question than anything with intelligent design. How has your scientific background impacted your theological studies and
Right. Well,
relationship with the Lord?
what's happened is I was becoming more convinced that God didn't exist, and what happened is the science really helped me to show that He clearly did exist. In fact, you may have heard the famous phrase that a little science can take people away from God, but a lot of science brings them back. And also, what I really see is many aspects of God's nature, His omnipotence, His power, His love are all manifested in nature. So, a lot of what science has done is it's helped to confirm God's existence and show His wondrous, glorious creation, and His power and love has been very encouraging.
That's so good. And that's so, and I think that that should encourage all of our young listeners that it's science shouldn't be something that we're scared of, but something that we dive into because similar to many fathers of science, it's a way to look at what our creator has done versus take us away from him. That's good. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Miller. This has been an amazing conversation. It's been very insightful for me, and I'm sure it's also been insightful for our listeners.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah. Where could they find you as far as, looking for your work or, do you have anything that you'd love to highlight for them as far as what they could read?
Mhm. Well, there's some very nice websites. If you go to intelligentdesign.org, that's intelligentdesign.org. That has a lot of our materials. It's sort of a clearinghouse for articles and websites and videos. Also, if you go to evolutionnews.org, a lot of my articles are in Evolution News. Of course, there's discovery.org under Intelligent Design. And a couple good books would be Your Design Body by Steve Loffman and Howard Glicksman. And also, there's a book about science and faith produced out of South Africa, and there'll be a link to that near this video. And I have a chapter, which is chapter 11, on engineering and biology. So those are some good ways to start looking into these ideas.
All right, so here's the big takeaway from today. The more we understand the universe, the more it looks designed. From physics to biology, Dr. Brian Miller showed us that nature runs on engineering logic, not random chance. The laws, the patterns, the fine-tuning, none of it looks accidental. If this sparked new questions for you, share it with somebody. And if you want bonus content, join our community at thesciencedilemma.com. Thanks for listening. Make sure to subscribe, follow, and share. We'll see you guys next time.